how to force your mind to do hard things. Understanding the enemy within. Imagine standing at the edge of a cold lake on a winter morning, knowing you need to dive in. Your body tenses, your mind races with excuses, and every fiber of your being screams to turn around and walk away. This is the moment where most people retreat. But what if I told you that this exact feeling, this mental resistance you experience, is not your weakness, it's your greatest teacher? This is the beginning of your journey into the deepest territories of human psychology, where the battle for your potential is fought not in the external world, but in the quiet chambers of your mind. Today we're going to explore why your brain fights you when you try to do difficult things, and more importantly, how you can win that fight. The truth is that every significant achievement, every breakthrough, every moment of growth in your life has required you to push through this invisible barrier. Yet most people spend their entire lives as prisoners of their own mental resistance, never understanding that they possess the keys to their own freedom. Research shows that resistance to work is a predominant behavioral challenge modulated by mental strain, fatigue, fear of failure, perfectionism, and burnout. But here's what that research doesn't tell you. This resistance isn't a bug in your mental programming. It's a feature, and once you understand how to use it, it becomes your greatest asset. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Mental Resistance. Picture this. You wake up with the best intentions. Today is the day you'll finally start that project, begin that workout routine, or tackle that challenging conversation you've been avoiding. But as the day progresses, something strange happens. Your motivation evaporates, like morning mist, replaced by an inexplicable urge to do anything else. Check your phone, organize your desk, make another cup of coffee. You find yourself trapped in a cycle of avoidance, and the worst part, you know exactly what's happening, but you feel powerless to stop it. This isn't laziness. This isn't lack of willpower. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from perceived threats. The fact is, resistance is relentless. It's a deeply ingrained wiring that we all have to move away from what the brain anticipates to be uncomfortable and stay with what's comfortable. Your brain is an ancient survival machine, wrapped in modern ambitions. For millions of years it has been perfected to keep you alive in a world where comfort meant safety and discomfort often meant death. When you think about doing something difficult, your brain interprets this as a potential threat. It floods your system with subtle warning signals. This might be dangerous. This might lead to failure. This might cause pain. Our brains are wired to avoid discomfort and chase ease. This fundamental truth explains why you can spend hours scrolling through social media, but struggle to focus on important work for even 30 minutes. The brain craves the easy dopamine hit, the predictable reward, the path of least resistance. But here's the fascinating part. This same mechanism that creates resistance can be hacked, reprogrammed, and turned into your greatest ally. The neural mechanisms of reinforcement learning are some of the most basic and ancient parts of our brains. For good reason, we evolved to be highly sensitive, to learn where we receive rewards, and to work hard to recreate the situations that brought them about. When you understand that your brain's resistance to difficulty is not personal, it's biological, you can stop fighting yourself and start working with your neural architecture. You can transform from someone who battles their mind to someone who directs it. The first step is recognizing resistance for what it truly is, a neutral force that can either derail your progress or fuel your growth, depending on how you choose to work with it. Chapter 2. The Science of Mental Effort. To truly understand how to force your mind to do hard things, we need to dive deep into the fascinating world of neuroscience and discover what actually happens in your brain when you encounter difficulty. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex acts as a willpower hub in the brain, consolidating signals from other areas of the brain to either encourage one to take action or resist urges and impulses. This small but mighty region of your brain is essentially your mental command center, the place where the decision to push through discomfort is made. But here's what most people don't realize. The same neural circuitry for motivation, willpower, and tenacity is activated similarly in demanding physical tasks, like a particularly difficult workout, as well as cognitive tasks involving mental effort, such as studying or resisting the urge to scroll social media. This means that every time you choose discomfort over comfort, Whether it's physical or mental, you're literally strengthening the same neural pathways. You're building what we might call your difficulty muscle. And like any muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. A consistent finding in this literature is that people tend to invest more effort in a task when there is greater reward on offer, as reflected in better performance and greater activation of control circuitry. But the reward doesn't have to be external. Your brain can learn to find reward in the act of overcoming difficulty itself. Think about the last time you accomplished something genuinely challenging. Remember that feeling of satisfaction, that sense of pride, that quiet confidence that came from knowing you did something difficult. That feeling isn't just emotional, it's neurochemical. Your brain released a cocktail of chemicals, including dopamine, endorphins, and norepinephrine, that literally rewarded you for choosing the difficult path. Physical exercise also leads to similar changes in the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex. This is why people who maintain challenging physical routines often find it easier to tackle mental challenges as well. They've trained their brains to associate effort with reward. But here's the critical insight. You don't need to wait for external circumstances to provide this reward. You can train your brain to anticipate and seek out the neurochemical reward that comes from doing difficult things. This is the beginning of transforming from someone who avoids difficulty to someone who seeks it out as a source of strength. The prefrontal cortex, often called the CEO of your brain, is where this transformation happens. Neuroscience tells us that our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain just behind our forehead, controls what we do. It directs what we pay attention to and think about, and even the emotions we experience. When you consistently choose difficult tasks over easy ones, you're literally rewiring this control center. You're teaching it that difficulty isn't something to avoid, it's something to master. Chapter 3. The myth of motivation. Let's destroy one of the most destructive myths about human behavior. The idea that you need to feel motivated to take action. This belief has probably derailed more dreams and sabotaged more goals than any other single misconception about how the human mind works. Here's the truth that no one wants to tell you. Motivation is not the cause of action, it's the result of action. When starting out, using self-discipline and objective "I will do this," rather than motivation as subjective "I want to do this," will lead to consistent action, and thus generate the motivation you were waiting for in the first place. Think about this for a moment. How many times have you waited to feel like doing something important? How many projects have you postponed until you felt more motivated? How many opportunities have slipped by while you waited for the mood to strike? The people who accomplish extraordinary things aren't more motivated than you. They've simply learned to act without motivation. They understand a fundamental truth about human psychology. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. The most successful people in the world don't rely on motivation to get things done. They've trained their brains for discipline. They understand the science behind willpower and use strategies that allow them to stay focused and consistent, even when they don't feel like it. This distinction between motivation and discipline is crucial. Motivation is an emotion. It comes and goes like weather. Discipline is a skill. It can be developed, strengthened, and relied upon, regardless of how you feel in the moment. When you wait for motivation, you're essentially waiting for your brain to feel like doing something difficult. But remember, your brain is wired to avoid difficulty. You might wait forever, but when you act with discipline, something remarkable happens. The very act of pushing through resistance creates a sense of momentum. Your brain begins to release the reward chemicals we discussed earlier. You start to feel capable, powerful, in control, and that feeling? That's motivation. But now it's motivation based on evidence. Evidence that you can do difficult things. Your sensory nervous system is always monitoring for actions you can take that will deliver a hit of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. We're wired to seek out pleasure. The key is training your brain to find pleasure in the act of doing difficult things, rather than in avoiding them. This is why people who exercise regularly often describe feeling motivated to work out. It's not that they're naturally more motivated. They've trained their brains to associate the difficult act of exercise with the rewarding feeling that comes afterward. They've created a positive feedback loop where discipline generates motivation, which makes future discipline easier. The same principle applies to any difficult task. The writer doesn't wait to feel inspired to write. They write, and inspiration follows. The entrepreneur doesn't wait to feel confident to start their business. They start, and confidence builds. The student doesn't wait to feel like studying. They study, and engagement develops. This understanding changes everything. It means you're not broken if you don't feel motivated. It means you don't need to fix your motivation before you can start taking action. It means you can begin right now, regardless of how you feel, knowing that the feeling you're waiting for will emerge through the very act of doing the difficult thing. Chapter 4. The Comfort Zone Conspiracy. There's a conspiracy against your potential, and it's happening inside your own mind. It's subtle, sophisticated, and so convincing that most people never even realize they're being manipulated. This conspiracy has a name: the comfort zone. But the comfort zone isn't what most people think it is. It's not just about avoiding physical discomfort or staying in familiar situations. Our brains tend to recoil from challenging tasks. But by embracing discomfort and using the Zeigarnik effect of remembering incomplete tasks, we can ignite an urge to finish what we've started. The real comfort zone is psychological. It's the mental space where everything feels predictable, manageable, and safe. It's where you can operate on autopilot without having to fully engage your consciousness. And while this zone serves an important function in preserving mental energy, it becomes a prison when it starts defining the limits of your life. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what's actually safe and what feels safe. To your neural circuitry, anything unfamiliar registers as potentially dangerous. This is why taking on a new challenge, learning a difficult skill, or pushing yourself beyond your current capabilities feels threatening even when logically you know it's beneficial. Our brains don't always distinguish between imagination and reality. In fact, research has shown that mentally rehearsing an activity can create the same neurological changes as physically performing it. This insight reveals something profound. Your brain's resistance to difficulty is often based on imagined threats rather than real ones. Most of the things you avoid aren't actually dangerous. They just feel dangerous because they're unfamiliar. Your brain is making decisions based on patterns from your past, not the reality of your present situation. It's treating the discomfort of growth as if it were the pain of actual harm. But here's the liberating truth. You can reprogram this response. Every time you voluntarily choose discomfort, you're sending a powerful signal to your brain. This thing I was afraid of is actually safe. In fact, it's beneficial. You're literally updating your internal threat assessment system. Psychology has seen a shift from people viewing stress and trauma in a negative light, and has also explored the positive effects that can be experienced following highly stressful or traumatic events. This research on post-traumatic growth reveals that difficulty doesn't just build character, it can fundamentally expand your sense of what's possible. The comfort zone conspiracy works by convincing you that where you are is where you belong. It whispers that you're not the type of person who does challenging things. It suggests that other people have some special quality you lack: more courage, more talent, more luck. But this is all sophisticated self-deception. The truth is that every person who has ever done anything difficult felt exactly the same resistance you feel. The difference is that they acted anyway. They understood that the feeling of resistance is not a stop sign, it's a GPS coordinate, showing them exactly where they need to go. Growth often happens outside your comfort zone. Try new activities, face your fears, and challenge yourself regularly. This could mean starting a new hobby, public speaking, or tackling a challenging project. Each time you step out of your comfort zone, you build resilience and confidence. When you begin to see your comfort zone not as a sanctuary but as a limitation, everything changes. You stop protecting it and start expanding it. You realize that the very discomfort you've been avoiding is the raw material of your transformation. Chapter 5. The 2-second rule. There's a moment. A crucial 2-second window that determines whether you'll push through resistance or surrender to it. Most people miss this moment entirely because it happens so quickly and subtly that it seems insignificant. But learning to recognize and master this moment is the difference between a life of mediocrity and a life of extraordinary achievement. Mental resistance lives at the beginning of the timeline of a task. This is a profound insight. The moment of greatest resistance isn't in the middle of difficult work. It's right before you start. It's in that split second when your brain is deciding whether to engage with the challenge or find an escape route. In that 2-second window, your brain is conducting an incredibly sophisticated cost-benefit analysis. It's weighing the immediate discomfort of starting against the imagined relief of avoiding the task. It's comparing the uncertain rewards of effort against the guaranteed comfort of procrastination. And unless you intervene, it will almost always choose the path of least resistance. But here's what changes everything. You can hijack this process. You can learn to recognize when you're in that critical moment and consciously override your brain's default programming. The first step is developing what I call resistance awareness, the ability to notice when you're about to choose the easy path. The crucial first step is just to notice that you have the resistance. You might not notice how it feels, but you'll notice that you've been putting off or avoiding something. Can you notice in the moment when you're actually turning away from it? This awareness creates a pause between stimulus and response. Instead of automatically moving away from difficulty, you create a moment of choice, and in that moment, you have the power to choose differently. The technique is deceptively simple. Count down from 5 to 1, and then immediately take the smallest possible action toward the difficult task. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then move. Don't think about whether you feel like it. Don't evaluate whether it's the perfect time. Don't negotiate with yourself. Just count down and act. When you feel resistance to work, it's not question of 2 minutes versus doing it all. It's usually question of 2 minutes or not doing anything. 2 minutes is better, especially if you consider that you will probably do way more in the end anyway. This countdown works because it bypasses the part of your brain that wants to analyze and evaluate. It creates artificial urgency that mimics the natural urgency that helps people act in emergency situations. Your brain doesn't have time to generate elaborate justifications for avoidance. It just acts. But the real power of the 2-second rule isn't in that initial action. It's in what happens next. Once you have those things defined, you've got to focus on them to the exclusion of all else, at least during your prime work time. Do them first. Focus, finish, then move on to the smaller tasks you need to complete today. When you successfully push through that initial moment of resistance, you create momentum. Your brain realizes that the thing it was afraid of isn't actually dangerous. The resistance begins to diminish. What felt impossible just moments before starts to feel manageable. This is why the most successful people have learned to act quickly on important decisions. They understand that the longer you think about doing something difficult, the more resistance your brain generates. They know that speed is the enemy of doubt, and hesitation is the enemy of action. The 2-second rule isn't about forcing yourself to complete entire projects in moments of low motivation. It's about understanding that the hardest part of any difficult task is starting, and that starting requires nothing more than counting down and taking one small action. Once you master this moment, you begin to realize that most of your limitations aren't real limitations. They're just unopposed resistance. And resistance, once you understand how to work with it, becomes one of your most powerful tools for growth. Chapter 6. The Physics of Mental Momentum. Newton's first law of motion states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion, unless acted upon by an external force. This principle, originally applied to physical objects, reveals one of the most important secrets about human psychology and behavior. Mental momentum operates exactly like physical momentum, and understanding this can transform how you approach difficult tasks forever. When you're not engaged in challenging work, your brain settles into what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a state of mental rest that conserves energy but also generates resistance to activation. Activity across the default mode and central executive networks often fluctuates in an antagonistic manner, such that activity in one is often accompanied by suppressed activity in the other. This means that breaking out of mental inertia requires an initial investment of energy that can feel disproportionate to the task at hand. It's like trying to push a heavy boulder. The hardest part is getting it to move the first inch. Once it's rolling, maintaining momentum requires much less effort. Initially, though, forming a habit may require conscious effort. This early stage recruits the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for higher-level thinking, decision-making, and self-regulation. But here's the remarkable part. As you repeat an action, the brain shifts responsibility to a different region, the basal ganglia. This part of the brain operates subconsciously to carry out routine behaviors. This neurological shift explains why difficult tasks become progressively easier with repetition. Your brain is literally rewiring itself to make the difficult path the path of least resistance. What once required tremendous conscious effort eventually becomes as automatic as brushing your teeth. But momentum works in both directions. Just as it becomes easier to continue once you start, it also becomes progressively harder to start the longer you avoid something. Each time you choose the easy path, you're strengthening the neural pathways that make future avoidance more likely. You're building momentum in the wrong direction. This is why procrastination tends to compound. The project you've been avoiding doesn't just stay the same size, it grows in your mind, accumulating layers of anxiety and resistance with each passing day. What might have been a manageable task begins to feel overwhelming, not because the task itself has changed, but because you've built up momentum in the direction of avoidance. People allocate the minimum amount of resources needed to complete a task, not the maximum amount of resources given the potential reward. Understanding this can help you work with your brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. Instead of trying to sustain maximum effort indefinitely, you can use the principle of momentum to make sustained effort feel effortless. The key is learning to create what I call micro-momentum, building small amounts of forward motion that compound over time. Instead of waiting until you feel capable of completing an entire project, you focus on creating just enough movement to overcome mental inertia. Here's how this works in practice. You commit to working on the difficult task for just 5 minutes. Not 5 minutes as a stepping stone to hours of work, but literally just 5 minutes. This small commitment feels manageable to your resistance-generating brain circuits. But here's what happens. Once you start, the physics of momentum take over. Your brain begins to shift from the default mode network to the task-positive network. The resistance that felt overwhelming just minutes before starts to dissolve. What seemed impossible begins to feel possible, and more often than not, you continue working far beyond your initial 5-minute commitment. My friend started working out. He brilliantly decided he'd only drive by the gym on day 1. Day 2 included parking in the parking lot. Day 3 included walking in the door, then promptly leaving. But by slowly building up his steps, he managed to start a steady workout routine that has lasted 15 years, including becoming a competitive athlete. This approach works because it honors the physics of mental momentum while respecting your brain's resistance mechanisms. You're not trying to overcome massive resistance all at once. You're gently shifting from rest to motion, from avoidance to engagement, from stuck to flowing. The beautiful thing about momentum is that it's self-reinforcing. Each time you successfully create movement in the direction of your goals, it becomes easier to create movement the next time. You're building evidence for your brain that difficult things are not just possible, they're your specialty. Chapter 7. The Paradox of Effort. Here's something that will fundamentally change how you think about difficult tasks. The relationship between effort and difficulty isn't linear. In fact, there's often an inverse relationship between how much effort you apply and how difficult something feels. This counterintuitive principle is the key to understanding why forcing your mind to do hard things sometimes requires doing less, not more. Resolve is based on interpretation of a current choice as a test case for a broader set of future choices, which puts at stake more than the outcome of the current choice. This insight reveals something profound about how your brain evaluates difficulty. When you approach a task as an isolated challenge, your brain can afford to resist. But when you frame it as part of a larger pattern of choices, as evidence of who you're becoming, the resistance changes character entirely. Think about the last time you tried to force yourself to do something difficult through pure willpower. How did that feel? Probably exhausting, frustrating, and ultimately unsustainable. That's because when you try to muscle through resistance, you're fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming. You're declaring war on your own nervous system. But there's another way. A way that works with your brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. Like your biceps or quadriceps, the willpower muscle can get exhausted from effort. But that doesn't mean we're all doomed to run out of willpower by noon. The key is understanding that willpower isn't just about brute force, it's about strategic application of mental resources. Use positive reinforcement. Neuroscience has shown that rewarding yourself for disciplined behavior releases dopamine, the brain's feel-good neurotransmitter. This feedback loop makes disciplined actions feel rewarding rather than restrictive. This is the beginning of the effort paradox. The more you can make difficult tasks feel rewarding rather than punitive, the less effort they actually require. The traditional approach to difficult tasks is based on a scarcity mindset. You have limited willpower, so you need to ration it carefully and apply maximum effort when you use it. But research reveals a different reality. But that doesn't mean we're all doomed to run out of willpower. I prefer to talk about becoming a willpower athlete. Any muscle in your body can be made stronger through exercise. If willpower is a muscle, even a metaphorical muscle, it should be possible to train it. This athletic approach to mental effort changes everything. Athletes don't get stronger by applying maximum effort all the time. They get stronger through strategic training that includes both challenge and recovery. They understand that sustainable performance comes from working at the edge of their current capacity, not from constantly exceeding it. Applied to mental tasks, this means learning to find what I call the sweet spot of difficulty, the point where something is challenging enough to promote growth, but not so overwhelming that it triggers maximum resistance. Dividing a daunting task into smaller subtasks reduces perceived difficulty and psychological resistance, helping to overcome procrastination and trick our brains into doing hard things. But the most profound aspect of the effort paradox is this. When you stop trying to force outcomes and start focusing on process, difficult tasks often become easier than easy tasks. This happens because your brain no longer needs to maintain the exhausting inner conflict between what you want to do and what you feel like doing. You are aligned, flowing, engaged, rather than struggling. Visualizing the positive outcomes of completing a difficult task creates a neural pathway that strengthens motivation, while reframing failure as a stepping stone to growth helps develop a growth mindset. When you can clearly see and feel the benefits of doing something difficult, your brain begins to anticipate those benefits rather than focusing on the temporary discomfort required to achieve them. This shifts the entire emotional landscape around challenging tasks. Instead of approaching them with dread, you approach them with anticipation. Instead of having to overcome resistance, you have to restrain enthusiasm. Instead of forcing yourself to act, you have to remind yourself to pace your efforts sustainably. The paradox of effort teaches us that the goal isn't to eliminate difficulty, it's to change your relationship with difficulty. When you can transform from someone who suffers through challenges to someone who seeks them out as opportunities for growth, you've mastered one of the most powerful psychological principles governing human achievement. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it begins the moment you start approaching difficult tasks with curiosity rather than resistance, with strategy rather than force, and with appreciation for the process rather than obsession with the outcome. How to force your mind to do hard things, Part 2. The architecture of mental toughness. If Part 1 was about understanding the enemy, Part 2 is about building your army. You now know that resistance is not your weakness. It's a signal showing you exactly where your greatest growth opportunities lie. But knowledge without application is just sophisticated procrastination. In this section, we're going to construct the mental architecture that transforms insight into action, resistance into resilience, and difficult tasks into your greatest source of power and satisfaction. Mental toughness is a measure of individual psychological resilience and confidence that may predict success in sport, education, and in the workplace. But what the research doesn't capture is the feeling of becoming someone who no longer fears difficulty. Someone who approaches challenges with the quiet confidence that comes from having built systems that make success inevitable. This is where we move from theory to practice, from understanding to implementation, from knowing what to do to actually doing it consistently, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. Chapter 8. Building your resistance profile. Before you can effectively work with your mental resistance, you need to understand its unique signature in your life. Just as every person has a distinct fingerprint, everyone has a distinct resistance profile, a pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that emerge when they encounter difficulty. Some people experience resistance as overwhelm. Their minds flood with everything that could go wrong, all the steps required, all the ways they might fail. Others experience it as fatigue, suddenly feeling tired whenever a challenging task appears. Still others experience it as distraction, finding themselves compulsively checking phones, organizing desks, or doing anything except the thing they know they should be doing. The first step in building your mental architecture is conducting a thorough resistance audit. For the next week, I want you to pay attention to your resistance patterns. Keep a simple log. When you notice yourself avoiding or procrastinating on something important, write down, what was the task you were avoiding? How did the resistance feel in your body? What thoughts went through your mind? What did you do instead? How long did you avoid it before taking action, if you took action at all? This isn't about judgment, it's about data collection. You can't optimize a system you don't understand, and you can't overcome patterns you haven't identified. Research reveals that resistance can have a mood of anger or hopelessness, defending a powerlessness you may feel. I shouldn't have to, it's not fair, or I'm actually afraid to take action because I know it won't work. I'd rather be stuck than suffer the pain of failure. Understanding which emotional flavor your resistance takes is crucial for developing targeted strategies. For some people, resistance shows up as perfectionism, the inability to start because they can't guarantee the outcome will be perfect. For others, it manifests as comparison, the certainty that others are more qualified, more talented, or more deserving of success. Still others experience resistance as time anxiety, the fear that they don't have enough time to do the task justice. So why start at all? Each resistance pattern requires a different approach. The perfectionist needs strategies for managing uncertainty and embracing iteration. The comparer needs techniques for focusing on their own journey and celebrating their unique strengths. The time-anxious person needs methods for breaking large tasks into manageable components. But here's what's fascinating. Once you clearly identify your resistance patterns, they lose much of their power over you. The moment you're aware it, you're mindful and have created a little space between yourself and the resistance. This space, this pause between trigger and response, is where your freedom lives. Notice it in your day as a way of disentangling from it. When you can observe your resistance objectively rather than being consumed by it, you transform from a victim of your patterns to a scientist studying them. And scientists don't get emotionally attached to their data, they use it to optimize their results. The goal of this resistance audit isn't to eliminate resistance, that's impossible and actually undesirable. Resistance serves important functions, including protecting you from genuinely harmful situations and helping you prioritize your energy. The goal is to become conscious of your patterns so you can choose how to respond to them. Once you understand your resistance profile, you can begin to predict when and how resistance will show up. This predictive ability is incredibly powerful because it allows you to prepare countermeasures in advance rather than trying to overcome resistance in the moment when your mental resources are already depleted. Think of this as creating a personalized resistance, early warning system. When you know that you typically experience resistance as fatigue in the mid-afternoon, you can schedule your most challenging tasks for the morning. When you know you tend to procrastinate on creative work by cleaning and organizing, you can deliberately create a messy workspace that forces you to engage with the creative task first. Your resistance profile is not a life sentence, it's a starting point. As you develop new strategies and build new neural pathways, your patterns will evolve. Tasks that once triggered massive resistance will begin to feel routine. Challenges that seemed impossible will become your preferred way of spending time. But this transformation begins with honest assessment of where you are right now, not where you think you should be or where you want to be. Resistance doesn't respond to wishful thinking. It responds to strategic action based on accurate self-knowledge. Chapter 9. The neuroscience of habit stacking. One of the most powerful discoveries in modern neuroscience is that your brain doesn't just form individual habits, it creates chains of habits that flow together automatically. Understanding this principle and learning to engineer these chains is the difference between relying on willpower and building systems that make difficult behaviors feel inevitable. You can use this method to train your brain to stick with habits for the long haul. The concept is called habit stacking, and it works because your brain is constantly looking for patterns and connections. When you attach a new, difficult behavior to an existing, automatic behavior, you're essentially hijacking the neural pathway that already exists. Here's how it works in practice. Instead of trying to create a completely new routine, you anchor the challenging behavior to something you already do consistently. The formula is simple. After I current habit, I will new habit. But the real power comes from understanding the neuroscience behind this process. So how do these new behaviors transform into habits? The answer lies in the habit loop. A pattern comprised of three components: cue, routine, and reward. Every habit follows this loop. And when you understand how to engineer each component, you can make difficult behaviors feel as automatic as brushing your teeth. The cue is the trigger that tells your brain to initiate the behavior. In habit stacking, your existing habit becomes the cue for the new habit. This is powerful because your brain already recognizes and responds to this signal. You're not asking it to learn something completely new. The routine is the behavior itself, the difficult task you want to make easier through repetition. This is where most people focus all their energy, trying to force themselves through sheer willpower. But when you've engineered a strong cue and a compelling reward, the routine becomes much easier to execute. The reward is what your brain gets in return for executing the behavior. For difficult tasks, you need to be intentional about creating immediate rewards, because the inherent benefits often come too far in the future for your brain to connect them with the behavior. But here's where most people get habit stacking wrong. They try to stack too many new habits at once, or they choose new habits that are too ambitious relative to their current capacity. Dividing a daunting task into smaller subtasks reduces perceived difficulty and psychological resistance, helping to overcome procrastination and trick our brains into doing hard things. The key is starting almost embarrassingly small. If you want to develop a daily writing practice, don't try to stack write for an hour onto your morning coffee routine. Stack open my writing document, or write one sentence. If you want to start exercising, don't stack a full workout. Stack putting on your workout clothes. This approach works because it honors your brain's resistance mechanisms while gradually building new neural pathways. The 2-minute rule. If a habit takes less than 2 minutes to start, do it immediately. The never miss twice rule. If you skip a habit once, don't let it happen again. But the most sophisticated application of habit stacking involves what I call resistance preloading. This is where you intentionally stack difficult tasks onto your highest energy, lowest resistance times of day. You identify the moments when your willpower is strongest and your resistance is lowest. Then you engineer your most challenging habits to occur during these windows. For most people, resistance is lowest in the first few hours after waking, before the day's decisions and stresses have depleted their mental resources. This is why successful people often tackle their most important work first thing in the morning, before checking email or engaging with external demands. Research shows that willpower decreases over the course of the day, as your energy gets spent on stress and self-control. Understanding this pattern allows you to align your most challenging tasks with your highest capacity moments, rather than hoping that motivation will somehow appear when you're already mentally depleted. But habit stacking goes beyond just timing. It's about creating what neuroscientists call behavioral momentum. When you successfully complete one challenging task, your brain releases chemicals that make the next challenging task feel more approachable. This is why people who exercise in the morning often find it easier to eat well throughout the day, or why completing a difficult project early makes other work feel more manageable. The ultimate goal of habit stacking is to create what I call difficulty cascades, sequences of challenging behaviors that feel natural and effortless because they're connected through neurological pathways rather than willpower. When you've successfully engineered these cascades, doing difficult things doesn't require constant decision-making or motivation management. It becomes part of who you are. Chapter 10. Environmental Design for Mental Performance. Your environment is constantly shaping your behavior, usually without your conscious awareness. The arrangement of objects in your space, the lighting, the sounds, the visual cues, all of these factors are continuously influencing your brain's assessment of what behaviors are easy or difficult to execute. Change your environment to change your habits. This principle is based on decades of research showing that environmental pressures can be more powerful than simply willing yourself to achieve a goal. In other words, the strategic arrangement of your physical and digital spaces can do more to help you tackle difficult tasks than hours of motivational content or willpower training. Think about the last time you walked into a library. Even if you weren't planning to study, or read. Something about that environment probably made you feel more focused, more serious, more inclined toward intellectual pursuits. That's environmental design at work. The space itself was communicating behavioral expectations to your brain. When your surroundings cue the behavior you want, willpower becomes far less necessary. The environment nudges you forward even when motivation is low. This means that much of your mental battle can be won or lost, based on how thoughtfully you've arranged your spaces for success. The first principle of environmental design is what I call friction engineering. This involves making desired behaviors easier to execute, while making undesired behaviors harder to execute. For instance, if you want to create a new habit, like be more mindful, instead of trying to achieve it with sheer willpower, create a tangible cue to link it to. For instance, you could leave a pen and gratitude journal on your bedside table. But friction engineering goes far beyond simple object placement. It involves thinking systematically about every element of your environment that might influence your behavioral choices. If you want to read more, you don't just put books in visible places. You also remove or hide devices that compete for your attention. If you want to exercise regularly, you don't just lay out your workout clothes. You also eliminate obstacles that make it harder to get to your exercise space. The second principle is cognitive offloading, using your environment to reduce the mental energy required to make good choices. Every time your brain has to decide what to do next, it uses up mental resources that could be applied to the actual challenging task. But when your environment is designed to make the next action obvious, you preserve that mental energy for what matters most. This is why successful people often have very simple, systematic approaches to routine decisions. They wear the same type of clothes, eat similar meals, follow predictable schedules. Not because they lack creativity, but because they understand that decision fatigue is real and that mental energy is precious. Getting enough rest is crucial for productivity and tackling difficult tasks, as it allows the brain to process information, repair damage, and rejuvenate itself, leading to improved cognitive abilities, creativity, problem-solving skills, and memory recall. Your physical environment can either support or undermine the quality of your rest, which directly impacts your capacity for handling challenging tasks. The third principle is identity reinforcement. Your environment should constantly remind you of the type of person you're becoming, not the type of person you've been. If you're developing a writing practice, your space should signal writer-dedicated workspace, inspirational books, visible, perhaps quotes or images that connect you to your creative identity. This works because our brains use environmental cues to understand which aspects of our identity are most relevant in any given moment. A person might be simultaneously a parent, a professional, an athlete, and an artist, but their environment signals which role is primary in that space. When your environment consistently signals your developing identity, it becomes easier to act in alignment with that identity. The fourth principle is attention architecture. Most modern environments are designed to capture and fragment your attention rather than support sustained focus. Notifications, visual clutter, multiple screens, background noise. All of these factors make it harder for your brain to enter the deep focus states required for challenging mental work. Research indicates that habit formation can take around 66 days on average, depending on the complexity of the behavior, but this timeline can be dramatically shortened when your environment supports the habit, rather than fighting against it. A well-designed environment doesn't just make good behaviors easier, it makes them feel inevitable. But environmental design isn't just about your physical space. Your digital environment may be even more important in the modern world. The apps on your phone, the websites you have bookmarked, your social media feeds, your email setup. All of these digital elements are constantly shaping your behavioral possibilities. Creating a digital environment that supports challenging work means being intentional about what you allow into your information diet. It means designing your technology use around your goals, rather than allowing technology companies to design your behavior around their goals. The ultimate goal of environmental design is to create what I call success inevitability, conditions where doing the right thing becomes the easiest thing. When your environment is optimized for your most important behaviors, you spend less mental energy fighting against your circumstances, and more energy engaging with the meaningful challenges that drive your growth. This doesn't mean eliminating all friction from your life. Some friction is necessary and beneficial, but it means being strategic about where friction exists ensuring that it supports your priorities rather than undermining them. Chapter 11. The Art of Progressive Overload. The principle of progressive overload is well known in physical training. To build strength, you must gradually increase the demands placed on your muscles over time. What most people don't realize is that this same principle governs all forms of mental and psychological development. Your capacity for handling difficult tasks can be systematically developed through strategic application of increasing challenges. Pushing yourself past your physical limits is uncomfortable, difficult, and stressful on the body. By repeatedly putting yourself in a position to challenge your physical endurance, you're building your mental strength brick by brick. Every rep, every dumbbell you pick up, helps you prove to yourself that you can do hard things and overcome previously insurmountable hurdles. This connection between physical and mental challenge isn't metaphorical, it's neurological. The benefits of regular fitness can actually change your brain chemistry too. A study from Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience showed that regular exercise helps the brain build resilience against cognitive impairment, setting you up for a long, healthy life and plenty of mental toughness. The progressive overload for mental tasks requires more sophistication than simply adding weight to a barbell. Your mind responds to different types of stress, cognitive complexity, emotional intensity, time pressure, ambiguity, social pressure, and creative challenge. Each of these dimensions can be gradually increased to expand your capacity for handling difficulty. Start by identifying your current mental weight limit, the level of challenge you can handle consistently without becoming overwhelmed or burning out. This becomes your baseline. From here, you can systematically increase the difficulty of tasks in small, manageable increments. For cognitive challenges, this might mean working on slightly more complex problems each week, or extending your focused attention span by a few minutes at a time. For emotional challenges, it might mean having slightly more difficult conversations, or maintaining composure in increasingly stressful situations. For creative challenges, it might mean tackling projects that push the boundaries of your current skill set, or working within constraints that force you to find novel solutions. The key is making increases small enough that they don't trigger overwhelming resistance, but large enough that they actually expand your capacity. Cold showers, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone builds resilience. Meditation strengthens focus and impulse control. These practices work because they provide controlled exposure to discomfort, allowing your nervous system to develop greater tolerance for stress without being overwhelmed by it. The research on post-traumatic growth reveals something profound. Humans have the capacity to become stronger through adversity, but only when the challenge is within their zone of manageable stress. Too little challenge leads to stagnation. Too much challenge leads to breakdown. But the right amount of challenge, what psychologists call optimal stress, leads to growth. This optimal stress zone is highly individual and changes as your capacity develops. What feels overwhelming today should feel manageable next month if you've been applying progressive overload consistently. This is why tracking your progress is so important. It helps you calibrate the difficulty of your challenges to match your developing capacity. But progressive overload isn't just about gradually increasing difficulty, it's also about recovering from challenges. Just as physical muscles need rest to grow stronger, your mental faculties need recovery time to consolidate the adaptations you're developing. This means building rest and reflection into your challenge progression. After periods of intense mental work, you need time to process what you've learned, integrate new capabilities, and prepare for the next level of difficulty. Without this recovery phase, progressive overload becomes progressive burnout. 3 broad themes and several sub-themes emerged in conceptualizing mental toughness. Characteristics: determination, defiance, pragmatic, optimistic, resilient, self-belief and independence, and autonomy. Cognitions: normalization, sense of escape, non-acceptance of constraints, influence, perception, and connection. And cognitive strategies: rational thinking, goal setting, pain management, and control. The goal of progressive overload is not to make your life perpetually difficult, it's to expand your capacity for handling whatever challenges naturally arise. When you systematically develop your mental strength, ordinary difficulties begin to feel manageable. Challenges that once seemed impossible start to feel exciting. You develop what I call difficulty confidence, the quiet certainty that you can handle whatever comes your way. This confidence isn't based on positive thinking or motivational mantras, it's based on evidence. Every time you successfully handle a challenge that previously would have overwhelmed you, you're building a database of proof that you're capable of growth, adaptation, and resilience. But perhaps most importantly, progressive overload changes your relationship with challenge itself. Instead of viewing difficult tasks as threats to be avoided, you begin to see them as opportunities to develop capabilities you didn't know you had. Challenge transforms from enemy to teacher, from obstacle to opportunity, from something that happens to you to something you actively seek out. Chapter 12: The Psychology of Mental Rehearsal. Your brain possesses an extraordinary capability that most people never fully utilize: the ability to create detailed mental simulations of future events that can actually improve your performance when those events occur. This isn't visualization in the sense of wishful thinking or positive daydreaming. It's a sophisticated psychological technology for preparing your nervous system to handle challenging situations with greater skill and composure. Our brains don't always distinguish between imagination and reality. In fact, research has shown that mentally rehearsing an activity can create the same neurological changes as physically performing it. Studies show that whether you're thinking about running or actually running, similar neurons are firing in your brain, and creating those feel-good pathways with visualization can help motivate you to get up and actually lace up your shoes. This principle opens up remarkable possibilities for building your capacity to handle difficult tasks. You can literally practice dealing with challenges before they occur, developing neural pathways that will activate when you face the real situation. But effective mental rehearsal is much more sophisticated than simply imagining success. Visualization is often praised in psychology. The problem is, when people imagine only the result, like crossing a finish line or holding a diploma, the gap between dream and reality can feel discouraging. However, when they visualize the steps required, training schedules, study sessions, specific actions, the brain creates a mental rehearsal that prepares it to follow through. This process-focused approach to mental rehearsal works because it prepares your brain for the reality of challenge, rather than the fantasy of effortless success. When you mentally practice the specific steps required to complete a difficult task, including the moments of resistance and doubt you're likely to encounter, you're essentially giving your brain a preview of how to respond to those situations. Before writing big projects, I map out the process in my head. I see myself outlining, drafting, revising, and editing, step by step. By the time I sit down, it feels familiar, almost like muscle memory. Process-based visualization primes your brain to expect effort, and when effort feels expected, it feels less like resistance. The key is including struggle in your mental rehearsal. Most people try to visualize perfect performance, but this actually makes real challenges feel more difficult because your brain hasn't been prepared for obstacles. Instead, mentally practice encountering setbacks and working through them. Visualize moments of doubt and see yourself choosing to continue anyway. Imagine getting stuck and see yourself finding creative solutions. This approach to mental rehearsal accomplishes several important psychological functions. First, it reduces the shock of encountering real difficulties because your brain has already experienced them in simulation. Second, it gives you a sense of agency and control because you've already practiced responding skillfully to challenging situations. Third, it builds confidence based on mental evidence rather than just hope. But mental rehearsal goes beyond visualizing task completion. It also involves rehearsing identity transformation. You can practice seeing yourself as the type of person who handles challenges well, who stays calm under pressure, who persists through setbacks. This identity rehearsal is particularly powerful because it aligns your self-concept with your desired behaviors. Get intimate with it so you can recognize the sensations of it, the thoughts surrounding it, and behaviors it defaults you to that lead you away from your intention. When you mentally practice recognizing and working with resistance, you develop what might be called metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes without being overwhelmed by them. This awareness creates psychological space between you and your resistance, allowing you to respond to difficult situations from choice rather than from compulsion. Instead of being controlled by your automatic reactions, you can consciously choose how to engage with challenging circumstances. The most sophisticated form of mental rehearsal involves what I call emotional preparation. Mentally practicing Not just what you'll do when faced with a challenge, but how you'll feel and how you'll work with those feelings. This includes rehearsing staying calm when you feel anxious, maintaining focus when you feel scattered, and choosing persistence when you feel like quitting. Emotional rehearsal is crucial because most people are derailed not by the intellectual demands of challenging tasks, but by their emotional responses to those demands. When you've mentally practiced staying composed under pressure, your actual performance under pressure improves dramatically. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of mental rehearsal is that it transforms uncertain futures into familiar territory. When you've mentally walked through a challenging situation multiple times, it no longer feels foreign or threatening. Your brain recognizes the patterns, knows the steps, and trusts its ability to navigate the experience successfully. This familiarity doesn't eliminate the challenge. The task is still difficult, and effort is still required. But it eliminates the additional difficulty created by uncertainty and fear of the unknown. You're dealing with one source of stress rather than multiple sources, making your mental resources more efficiently allocated to the actual work rather than anxiety management. Chapter 13: The Compound Effect of Microdisciplines. One of the most profound insights about human behavior is that extraordinary outcomes are rarely the result of extraordinary efforts. Instead, they emerge from the compound effect of small, consistent actions that seem insignificant in the moment, but create massive changes over extended periods of time. Small, repeated efforts compound into significant progress over time. In fact, studies have proven that this helps you learn faster and remember for longer versus large stretches of learning. This principle challenges one of the most destructive myths about achievement: the idea that meaningful change requires dramatic action or heroic effort. The truth is that your brain is much better equipped to handle small, consistent challenges than large, irregular ones. When you try to create change through massive effort, you're fighting against your nervous system's natural resistance to sudden shift. But when you work through micro-disciplines, tiny daily practices that gradually expand your capacity, you're working with your brain's natural adaptation mechanisms. Consistency is at the heart of building resolve. Every time you repeat a disciplined action, your brain reinforces the neural pathways that make that behavior easier. Think of it as creating a mental shortcut. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. This neurological reality means that a person who does something difficult for 5 minutes every day will ultimately develop greater capacity than someone who does something difficult for 5 hours once per week. But microdisciplines are powerful for reasons that go beyond neuroplasticity. They also solve one of the biggest psychological barriers to sustained effort: the overwhelming nature of long-term goals. When you focus on what you need to do today, rather than everything you need to do over the next year, challenging tasks become psychologically manageable. Celebrate tiny wins. Take a moment to acknowledge every completed task, no matter how small. Those little wins create momentum and reinforce your progress. This celebration isn't just feel-good psychology, it's strategic neurochemistry. Every time you acknowledge progress, your brain releases dopamine, which strengthens the neural pathways associated with the behavior that created that progress. The compound effect works because of a fundamental principle of human psychology. Identity is shaped by evidence. Every time you complete a micro-discipline, you're providing evidence to your brain that you're the type of person who does challenging things consistently. This evidence accumulates over time, gradually shifting your self-concept from someone who struggles with difficult tasks to someone for whom difficult tasks are routine. But designing effective micro-disciplines requires understanding the difference between activities that feel productive and activities that actually create meaningful change. Many people mistake busy work for discipline, engaging in tasks that require effort but don't contribute to their most important goals. Effective micro-disciplines have several characteristics. They're specific enough to be measured. You know exactly when you've completed them. They're small enough to be sustainable. You can do them even on your worst days. They're connected to your larger goals. Completing them moves you closer to what you ultimately want to achieve. And they're challenging enough to require conscious choice. They're not so easy that they happen automatically. Ask yourself, what's the very next thing I can do? Maybe it's fixing one bug, opening your editor, or writing one line of code. Set tiny, achievable milestones. Write one function. Debug one error. Read one section of documentation. Remove friction points and make it easy to start. Keep your tools ready, your workspace organized, and your editor open. This approach to micro-disciplines transforms the psychology of challenge. Instead of facing a mountain of work that seems impossible to climb, you're facing a single step that's clearly within your capability. But here's what's remarkable. Those single steps add up to extraordinary distances over time. The mathematics of compound improvement are striking. If you improve by just 1% each day, you'll be nearly 37 times better after 1 year. This isn't just theoretical. It's how all meaningful change actually occurs in the real world. Novels are written 1 page at a time. Businesses are built 1 customer at a time. Skills are developed 1 practice session at a time. But the compound effect of microdisciplines extends beyond skill development or goal achievement. It also transforms your relationship with effort itself. When you consistently choose small challenges, your brain begins to see effort not as something to avoid, but as a normal part of daily life. Challenge becomes ordinary, difficulty becomes routine, and growth becomes inevitable. Mental toughness offers many advantages. While difficult to fully define, it provides insights into why we respond the way we do to life events and how we perform at our limits. The development of mental toughness through microdisciplines is perhaps the most sustainable way to build this capacity, because it doesn't rely on extraordinary circumstances or peak performance states. This approach honors the way your brain actually changes and grows. Instead of trying to force transformation through willpower alone, you're creating conditions where transformation becomes the natural result of your daily choices. You're building mental strength, the same way you would build physical strength, through consistent, progressive challenge that gradually expands your capabilities. The ultimate goal of microdisciplines is to reach a point where doing difficult things feels as automatic as breathing, not because the tasks themselves become easy, but because your capacity to handle difficulty becomes so well developed that challenging work feels like a natural expression of who you are, rather than something you have to force yourself to do. Chapter 14: Advanced Resistance Management. As you develop greater skill in working with mental resistance, you'll discover that it becomes more sophisticated in response. The obvious forms of resistance, procrastination, distraction, avoidance, become easier to manage, but your brain, in its infinite creativity, begins to generate more subtle forms of resistance that can derail your progress if you're not prepared for them. Advanced resistance management requires understanding that resistance evolves as you do. The strategies that work for overcoming basic procrastination may not work for overcoming the resistance that emerges when you're attempting truly challenging growth. This higher-order resistance is often more psychological than behavioral, more about identity than about action. One common form of advanced resistance is what I call productive procrastination, engaging in legitimate, valuable activities that nonetheless serve to avoid the most important, challenging work. This might look like researching when you should be creating, planning when you should be executing, or perfecting when you should be completing. Productive procrastination is particularly insidious because it feels virtuous. You're being responsible, thorough, professional. But if you're honest with yourself, you're also avoiding the uncertainty and risk that comes with doing your most important work. Some possibly brain imaging correlates are reviewed that show resistance affects the right side of the prefrontal region that lies behind your forehead lights up when we're trying to avoid something. Another form of advanced resistance is success resistance, the unconscious sabotage that can occur when you're approaching a breakthrough or achievement. This happens because success often requires leaving behind familiar identities and stepping into unknown territories. Your brain, which values predictability above almost everything else, may create resistance to protect you from the uncertainty that comes with growth. Success resistance can manifest as sudden illness before important events, relationship conflicts that demand attention during crucial work periods, or imposter syndrome that makes you question whether you deserve the opportunities you're creating. Recognizing these patterns allows you to work with them rather than being derailed by them. A third form of advanced resistance is meaning resistance, the existential doubt that can emerge when you're engaged in challenging work. This is the voice that questions whether your efforts matter, whether your goals are worthwhile, whether you should be doing something else with your life. Meaning resistance is particularly common among people who are pursuing ambitious or creative endeavors. Let me give you a challenge for the next week. Catch yourself in the act. The moment you start piling on excuses or long explanations, stop. Replace them with something simple, firm, and direct. This same principle applies to advanced resistance. The moment you notice sophisticated forms of resistance emerging, you need equally sophisticated responses. For productive procrastination, the antidote is what I call bias toward action. When you find yourself researching, planning, or perfecting beyond what's truly necessary, you need to force yourself to take imperfect action. This doesn't mean being reckless. It means accepting that most planning has diminishing returns, and that real learning happens through engagement with challenging work. For success, resistance, the key is anticipating it. When you're approaching significant achievements or transitions, expect your brain to create obstacles. Expect relationship drama. Expect health issues. Expect self-doubt. When these things arise, you can recognize them as predictable responses to growth, rather than evidence that you're on the wrong path. For meaning resistance, the solution is connecting your challenging work to something larger than yourself. This doesn't have to be grandiose. It could be as simple as recognizing how your growth benefits the people you care about, or how your example might inspire others to pursue their own challenges. Open to the experience of it. How does it feel in your body? Get intimate with it so you can recognize the sensations of it, the thoughts surrounding it, and behaviors it defaults you to that lead you away from your intention. Advanced resistance management requires this level of sophisticated self-awareness, the ability to observe your resistance patterns without being controlled by them. But the most important insight about advanced resistance is that it's actually a sign of progress. When your brain generates more sophisticated resistance, it means you're working at the edge of your current capabilities. You're in the zone where real growth happens. Instead of viewing advanced resistance as a problem to be solved, you can view it as feedback that you're pushing into territory where transformation is possible. This reframe changes everything. Instead of being discouraged by resistance, you can be encouraged by it. Instead of seeing it as evidence that you're doing something wrong, you can see it as confirmation that you're doing something significant. Resistance becomes not your enemy, but your growth partner, a sophisticated training system that adapts its challenges to match your developing capacity. The ultimate goal of advanced resistance management isn't to eliminate resistance completely. It's to develop such a sophisticated relationship with resistance that you can dance with it rather than fighting against it. When you reach this level of skill, challenging work becomes not just possible, but enjoyable, because you've learned to find engagement and even pleasure in the very experiences that most people spend their lives avoiding. Chapter 15. Building Systems for Sustained Excellence. Individual moments of overcoming resistance are valuable, but they don't create lasting transformation. Real change comes from building systems that make excellence inevitable rather than exceptional. This means creating structures, processes, and environments that support consistent high performance even when motivation is low, energy is depleted, and resistance is high. Research indicates that habit formation can take around 66 days on average, depending on the complexity of the behavior. But systems-based approaches can dramatically reduce this timeline by removing the cognitive load associated with decision-making and willpower management. When you build systems that make difficult behaviors automatic, you free your mental resources for the actual challenging work rather than the meta work of motivating yourself to do the challenging work. The first principle of system building is what I call decision automation. Every decision you have to make about when, where, and how to engage in challenging work is a potential point of resistance. But when these decisions are made in advance through systematic processes, resistance has fewer opportunities to intervene. Implementation intentions. Pre-plan your discipline. Instead of saying, "I'll work out tomorrow," say, "I will work out at 7 a.m. at the gym for 45 minutes. This level of specificity eliminates the micro-decisions that can derail your efforts. Your brain knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and for how long, reducing the cognitive friction associated with challenging tasks. But effective systems go beyond just scheduling. They also include what I call failure protocols, predetermined responses to the inevitable moments when your systems break down, because they will break down. Perfect consistency is not a realistic goal for human beings, and systems that depend on perfect execution are systems designed to fail. Failure protocols might include rules like, If I miss my morning routine, I'll do a abbreviated version before lunch. Or if I can't do my full workout, I'll at least do 5 minutes of movement. These protocols prevent small deviations from becoming complete derailments. They maintain system integrity, even when individual executions are imperfect. The second principle is energy optimization. Not all hours of the day are equal for challenging work. Research consistently shows that most people have higher cognitive resources in the morning, declining throughout the day as decision fatigue and stress accumulate. Building systems means aligning your most important work with your highest capacity time periods. This requires honest assessment of your energy patterns, rather than wishful thinking about when you'd like to be productive. Track your energy levels throughout the day for a week. Notice when you feel most alert, when you feel most creative, when you feel most capable of sustained effort. Then design your systems to take advantage of these natural rhythms. The third principle is feedback integration. Systems without feedback mechanisms tend to drift over time, becoming less effective as circumstances change. Effective systems include regular reviews that allow you to assess what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be adjusted. Review systems don't have to be elaborate. They can be as simple as a weekly 10-minute evaluation of your progress and challenges. The key is building this reflection time into your system so that it happens automatically, rather than only when problems become obvious. But feedback integration also means building real-time feedback into your daily processes. This might mean tracking specific metrics that tell you whether your system is working, or creating environmental cues that signal when you're off track. The goal is to create systems that are self-correcting, rather than systems that require external supervision to maintain. The fourth principle is scalability. Your systems need to work not just when life is calm and predictable, but also when you're dealing with stress, travel, illness, or other disruptions. This means building flexibility into your systems while maintaining their core structure. Scalable systems have minimum viable versions that you can execute even under challenging circumstances. If your normal workout system involves an hour at the gym, your scaled system might be 10 minutes of bodyweight exercises at home. If your normal writing system involves 2 hours of focused work, your scaled system might be 15 minutes of journaling. The goal isn't to maintain peak performance under all circumstances, it's to maintain system integrity under all circumstances. When your systems can flex without breaking, you can weather life's inevitable storms without losing the habits that support your growth. The fifth principle is identity reinforcement. Your systems should constantly remind you of the type of person you're becoming, not just the tasks you need to complete. Every element of your system should communicate that you're someone who does challenging things consistently, someone who values growth over comfort, someone who keeps commitments to themselves. This identity reinforcement happens through the language you use to describe your systems, the way you structure your physical environment, and the social contexts you create around your challenging work. When your systems consistently reinforce your developing identity, maintaining them becomes not just about achieving goals, but about expressing who you are. Mental toughness is essential because it helps us be the best possible version of ourselves, lead a productive and contented life, and strive toward our goals. Building systems for sustained excellence is ultimately about becoming the type of person for whom difficult work is not an exception, but a natural expression of your character. The ultimate test of a system isn't whether it works when you're motivated, it's whether it works when you're not motivated. When you've built systems that support challenging work regardless of your emotional state, you've created something more valuable than any individual achievement. You've created a reliable process for turning your potential into reality. Chapter 15. Building systems for sustained excellence. Individual moments of overcoming resistance are valuable, but they don't create lasting transformation. Real change comes from building systems that make excellence inevitable rather than exceptional. This means creating structures, processes, and environments that support consistent high performance even when motivation is low, energy is depleted, and resistance is high. Research indicates that habit formation can take around 66 days on average, depending on the complexity of the behavior. But systems-based approaches can dramatically reduce this timeline by removing the cognitive load associated with decision-making and willpower management. When you build systems that make difficult behaviors automatic, You free your mental resources for the actual challenging work, rather than the meta work of motivating yourself to do the challenging work. The first principle of system building is what I call decision automation. Every decision you have to make about when, where, and how to engage in challenging work is a potential point of resistance. But when these decisions are made in advance through systematic processes, resistance has fewer opportunities to intervene. Implementation intentions pre-plan your discipline. Instead of saying, "I'll work out tomorrow," say, "I will work out at 7 a.m. at the gym for 45 minutes. This level of specificity eliminates the micro decisions that can derail your efforts. Your brain knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and for how long, reducing the cognitive friction associated with challenging tasks. But effective systems go beyond just scheduling. They also include what I call failure protocols, predetermined responses to the inevitable moments when your systems break down. Because they will break down, perfect consistency is not a realistic goal for human beings, and systems that depend on perfect execution are systems designed to fail. Failure protocols might include rules like, if I miss my morning routine, I'll do an abbreviated version before lunch, or if I can't do my full workout, I'll at least do 5 minutes of movement. These protocols prevent small deviations from becoming complete derailments. They maintain system integrity, even when individual executions are imperfect. The second principle is energy optimization. Not all hours of the day are equal for challenging work. Research consistently shows that most people have higher cognitive resources in the morning, declining throughout the day as decision fatigue and stress accumulate. Building systems means aligning your most important work with your highest capacity time periods. This requires honest assessment of your energy patterns rather than wishful thinking about when you'd like to be productive. Track your energy levels throughout the day for a week. Notice when you feel most alert, when you feel most creative, when you feel most capable of sustained effort. Then design your systems to take advantage of these natural rhythms. The third principle is feedback integration. Systems without feedback mechanisms tend to drift over time, becoming less effective as circumstances change. Effective systems include regular reviews that allow you to assess what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be adjusted. Review systems don't have to be elaborate. They can be as simple as a weekly 10-minute evaluation of your progress and challenges. The key is building this reflection time into your system so that it happens automatically rather than only when problems become obvious. But feedback integration also means building real-time feedback into your daily processes. This might mean tracking specific metrics that tell you whether your system is working, or creating environmental cues that signal when you're off track. The goal is to create systems that are self-correcting, rather than systems that require external supervision to maintain. The fourth principle is scalability. Your systems need to work not just when life is calm and predictable, but also when you're dealing with stress, travel, illness, or other disruptions. This means building flexibility into your systems while maintaining their core structure. Scalable systems have minimum viable versions that you can execute even under challenging circumstances. If your normal workout system involves an hour at the gym, your scaled system might be 10 minutes of bodyweight exercises at home. If your normal writing system involves 2 hours of focused work, your scaled system might be 15 minutes of journaling. The goal isn't to maintain peak performance under all circumstances. It's to maintain system integrity under all circumstances. When your systems can flex without breaking, you can weather life's inevitable storms without losing the habits that support your growth. The fifth principle is identity reinforcement. Your systems should constantly remind you of the type of person you're becoming, not just the tasks you need to complete. Every element of your system should communicate that you're someone who does challenging things consistently, someone who values growth over comfort, someone who keeps commitments to themselves. This identity reinforcement happens through the language you use to describe your systems, the way you structure your physical environment, and the social context you create around your challenging work. When your systems consistently reinforce your developing identity, maintaining them becomes not just about achieving goals but about expressing who you are. Mental toughness is essential because it helps us be the best possible version of ourselves, lead a productive and contented life, and strive toward our goals. Building systems for sustained excellence is ultimately about becoming the type of person for whom difficult work is not an exception, but a natural expression of your character. The ultimate test of a system isn't whether it works when you're motivated. It's whether it works when you're not motivated. When you've built systems that support challenging work regardless of your emotional state, you've created something more valuable than any individual achievement. You've created a reliable process for turning your potential into reality. Chapter 16. The Neuroscience of Peak Performance. When most people think about peak performance, they imagine a state of effortless flow where challenging work feels easy and natural. But neuroscience reveals a more nuanced picture. True peak performance isn't the absence of challenge, it's the optimal relationship with challenge. It's a state where difficulty is fully engaged rather than avoided, where resistance is transformed into fuel rather than treated as an obstacle. The regions of this network, which are important substrates of working memory and executive functions, typically show elevated activity during cognitively demanding, externally focused tasks. What's fascinating is that the brains of peak performers show different patterns of activation when engaged in challenging work compared to average performers. Research using brain imaging techniques has shown that individuals with a more active prefrontal cortex are better at exercising willpower. But in peak performers, this activation is more efficient. Their brains don't work harder, they work smarter. They've developed neural pathways that allow them to engage with difficult tasks using less overall energy, while maintaining higher performance. This efficiency comes from years of progressive challenge that has literally rewired their brains. When you consistently choose difficult tasks over easy ones, you're not just building willpower, you're optimizing your neural architecture for sustained high performance. Consistent with the idea that intrinsic motivation is associated with dopaminergic signaling, optimal challenge was associated greater activity within the caudate putamen and. This reveals something profound about peak performers. They've trained their brains to release reward chemicals in response to challenge itself, not just in response to success. This neurochemical shift changes everything. Instead of needing external rewards to motivate difficult work, peak performers generate internal rewards through the very act of engaging with challenge. This creates a positive feedback loop, where difficult tasks become intrinsically rewarding, leading to more engagement with difficult tasks, leading to greater capacity, leading to even more challenging work becoming rewarding. But peak performance isn't just about individual brain function. It's also about what neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility. This is the ability to rapidly shift between different mental frameworks, to see problems from multiple perspectives, and to generate creative solutions under pressure. The antagonistic dynamic between the default mode and central executive networks, along with the role of the salience mediating switching instigated by the anterior insula, may inform three characteristics of intrinsic motivation. Peak performers have developed greater control over these network transitions, allowing them to move fluidly between focused work and creative insight. This flexibility emerges through consistent exposure to varied challenges. When you regularly engage with different types of difficult tasks, cognitive, emotional, creative, physical, you're training your brain to be adaptable rather than specialized. You're building what we might call challenge agility, the capacity to rapidly adjust your approach based on the demands of the situation. The practical implications of this research are profound. It means that peak performance isn't a genetic gift or a stroke of luck. It's a trainable state that emerges through strategic engagement with challenging experiences. Every time you choose a difficult task over an easy one, you're literally rewiring your brain toward greater capacity. The first experimental studies on intrinsic motivation were conducted on non-human animals, and it is therefore fitting that the first insights on the neurobiology of intrinsic motivation have been derived in animal research. This research reveals that the drive to seek out and master challenges is not uniquely human. It's a fundamental biological drive that exists across species. Understanding this drive changes how we think about difficult work. Instead of viewing challenge as something imposed on you by external circumstances, you can recognize it as something your brain is naturally wired to seek out. The feeling of resistance you experience isn't evidence that you're doing something unnatural. It's evidence that your ancient survival systems are being activated by the prospect of growth. Regular exercise, both intense cardiovascular trainings and mindful exercise like yoga, also makes the body and brain more resilient to stress, which is a great boost to willpower. This mind-body connection reveals that peak performance isn't just about mental training, it's about creating optimal conditions throughout your entire nervous system. Peak performers understand this integration. They don't just train their minds, they train their entire systems for sustained high performance. They recognize that physical health, mental clarity, emotional regulation, and spiritual purpose all contribute to their capacity for engaging with challenging work. But perhaps the most important insight about peak performance is that it's not a destination, it's a process. Peak performers aren't people who have reached some final state of mastery. They're people who have learned to find deep satisfaction in the continuous process of growth through challenge. They've transformed the journey into the destination. Chapter 17, The Identity Shift, from Comfort Seeker to Challenge Seeker. The most profound transformation you can undergo isn't learning new skills or achieving specific goals. It's shifting your fundamental identity from someone who avoids difficulty to someone who actively seeks it out. This identity shift is the difference between temporary behavioral change and permanent life transformation. Self-discipline dictates a great deal of what we receive in life, but self-discipline itself emerges from identity. When you see yourself as someone who does challenging things consistently, self-discipline becomes not a force you have to summon, but a natural expression of who you are. Identity operates like a powerful psychological force that influences every decision you make. When you believe you're someone who avoids difficult conversations, you automatically generate resistance when challenging conversations arise. When you believe you're someone who finds exercise unpleasant, your brain will constantly generate evidence to support that belief. But when you begin to see yourself as someone who thrives on challenge, something remarkable happens. Your brain starts looking for opportunities to confirm this new identity. Difficult tasks begin to feel like natural expressions of your character, rather than violations of your preferences. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen through positive thinking alone. It happens through what psychologists call identity-based evidence accumulation. Every time you choose a challenging task over an easy one, you're providing evidence to your brain that you're the type of person who does challenging things. This evidence accumulates over time, gradually shifting your self-concept. Mental toughness in Australian football is a collection of values, attitudes, behaviors, and emotions that enable you to persevere and overcome any obstacle, adversity, or pressure experienced, but also to maintain concentration and motivation when things are going well, to consistently achieve your goals. This definition reveals something important about identity transformation. It's not just about handling adversity. It's about maintaining excellence when things are going well. Many people can summon temporary discipline during crises, but challenge seekers maintain their commitment to growth even when external pressure is absent. The identity shift involves changing several core beliefs about yourself and your relationship with difficulty. From "I'm not good at difficult things" to "I'm developing my capacity for challenge." This shift acknowledges that ability is not fixed, but expandable through consistent practice. From "I need to feel motivated to take action" to "I take action to create motivation." This shift changes you from someone who waits for optimal conditions to someone who creates optimal conditions through action. From "difficult tasks are punishments" to "difficult tasks are opportunities." This reframe transforms your emotional relationship with challenge, from avoidance to approach. From "I should be able to do this easily" to "growth requires struggle." This shift eliminates the self-judgment that makes difficult tasks even more difficult. From "failure means I'm not capable" to "failure means I'm growing." This perspective change allows you to extract learning from setbacks rather than evidence of inadequacy. But identity shifts require more than just changing your thoughts. They require changing your environment, your relationships, and your daily practices to support your new identity. You cannot maintain the identity of a challenge seeker while surrounding yourself with people who constantly seek comfort and convenience. The concept emerged in the context of sports training and sports psychology as one of a set of attributes that allow a person to become a better athlete and able to cope with difficult training and difficult competitive situations and emerge without losing confidence. This sports psychology insight reveals that challenge-seeking identity is cultivated through association with others who share similar values around growth and excellence. This means you need to be intentional about the social environments you create and participate in. Spend time with people who are pursuing challenging goals. Join communities focused on growth rather than entertainment. Engage in conversations about development, learning, and pushing boundaries, rather than just comfort and convenience. Your identity shift also requires what I call language renovation, changing how you speak about yourself and your experiences. Instead of saying, "I have to do this difficult thing," start saying, "I get to do this challenging thing." Instead of "this is so hard," try "this is helping me grow." Instead of "I'm not good at this yet," try "I'm developing this skill." These language shifts might seem superficial, but they're actually quite powerful. Your brain pays close attention to the language you use to describe your experiences, and that language shapes your future thoughts and behaviors. When you consistently use language that frames challenge as opportunity, your brain begins to actually perceive challenge as opportunity. But the deepest level of identity shift involves what psychologists call value alignment. This is where you move beyond seeing challenging work as a means to an end, something you do to achieve goals, and begin to see it as intrinsically valuable. You start to value growth for its own sake, struggle for its teaching potential, and difficulty for its capacity to reveal your capabilities. When you reach this level of identity integration, you no longer need external motivation to engage with challenging tasks, because the engagement itself has become rewarding. You've transformed from someone who does difficult things despite not wanting to someone who actively seeks out difficulty because that's where you feel most alive, most engaged, and most like yourself. Chapter 18: The Art of Strategic Suffering. There's a profound difference between suffering that diminishes you and suffering that develops you. Most people experience only the first type, random, purposeless difficulty, that feels imposed by circumstances beyond their control. But peak performers have learned to engage in what I call strategic suffering, the conscious choice to embrace specific types of challenge that systematically expand their capabilities. Embracing discomfort until it feels normal. Confidence is not built in comfort, it's built in the uncomfortable places most people try to avoid. The moments that made you stronger were never the easy ones. They were the ones where you felt nervous, unprepared, maybe even afraid, but you stepped forward anyway. Strategic suffering is different from random suffering in several key ways. It's voluntary rather than imposed. It's progressive rather than overwhelming. It's purposeful rather than arbitrary. And most importantly, it's designed to build capacity rather than just test endurance. The research on post-traumatic growth reveals that humans have the capacity to become stronger through adversity, but only when specific conditions are met. The suffering must be within their zone of manageable stress, difficult enough to promote adaptation, but not so overwhelming that it causes breakdown. There must be adequate support systems and recovery periods, and there must be meaning-making frameworks that help people extract learning and growth from the experience. Strategic suffering applies these same principles to voluntarily chosen challenges. Instead of waiting for life to impose difficulties on you, you proactively engage with carefully selected challenges that promote the specific types of growth you want to develop. This might mean choosing social challenges if you want to build confidence in interpersonal situations, volunteering to give presentations, initiating difficult conversations, or joining groups outside your comfort zone. It might mean choosing physical challenges if you want to build resilience and mental toughness, training for endurance events, practicing cold exposure, or engaging in demanding physical training. It might mean choosing creative challenges if you want to develop innovative thinking, tackling projects with no clear solutions, working within constraining parameters, or publicly sharing work before it feels ready. Or it might mean choosing cognitive challenges if you want to build intellectual capacity, studying difficult subjects, learning complex skills, or engaging with ideas that stretch your thinking. The key is that strategic suffering is conscious and intentional. You're not just randomly making your life more difficult, you're strategically applying stress in ways that promote specific adaptations. You become, in essence, the scientist of your own development. These findings imply that athletes should aim to view challenges with realistic optimism, use more emotion-focused strategies when dealing with difficult situations, and coaches should aim to gradually expose athletes to highly demanding physical and mental situations, rather than shielding them from them, to help develop superior coping skills. This gradual exposure principle is crucial for strategic suffering. You can't jump immediately to the most challenging experiences your field offers. You need to progressively build your capacity through increasingly demanding experiences. This progressive approach allows your nervous system to adapt gradually, rather than being overwhelmed. But strategic suffering isn't just about building individual capacity. It's also about developing what psychologists call stress inoculation. When you regularly expose yourself to chosen challenges, you develop greater resilience to unchosen challenges. Life's inevitable difficulties feel more manageable because you've been training with self-imposed difficulties. This training effect extends beyond just psychological resilience. People who engage in strategic suffering often report that previously overwhelming situations begin to feel routine. Public speaking becomes less anxiety-provoking when you've been regularly choosing to speak in challenging situations. Difficult conversations feel less threatening when you've been practicing initiating them. Complex problems feel less overwhelming when you've been training with complex challenges. But perhaps the most profound benefit of strategic suffering is that it transforms your relationship with uncertainty and discomfort. Instead of seeing these experiences as threats to be avoided, you begin to see them as familiar territory where growth happens. You develop what might be called discomfort confidence, the quiet certainty that you can handle whatever challenges arise. Give the technique a shot. The next time you're putting something off, whether it's something you need to get done or something on your resistance list, the same principle applies to strategic suffering. When you regularly choose challenging experiences, your capacity for handling unexpected challenges increases dramatically. This doesn't mean seeking out suffering for its own sake, or engaging in masochistic behavior. Strategic suffering is always purposeful, always designed to build capacity for something you value. It's suffering in service of growth, not suffering as an end in itself. The art of strategic suffering involves learning to distinguish between productive discomfort and destructive discomfort, between challenges that build capacity and challenges that simply exhaust you, between voluntary hardship that serves your goals and involuntary hardship that merely happens to you. When you master this art, you gain something extraordinarily valuable, the ability to proactively shape your development rather than just reacting to whatever circumstances life provides. You become someone who doesn't just endure difficulty, but actively seeks it out as the most reliable path to becoming who you want to become. Chapter 19. Flow states and challenge optimization. There exists a remarkable psychological state where the most challenging work feels effortless, where time seems to disappear, where your sense of self dissolves into pure engagement with the task at hand. Psychologists call this state flow, and understanding how to access it reliably transforms your entire experience of difficult work. In its most experientially abundant state, intrinsic motivation entails cognitive absorption and non-self-conscious enjoyment of an activity. This phenomenology suggests diminished activity within regions of the default mode network, which are commonly activated during self-focused mental activity. Flow represents the optimal relationship between your current skill level and the challenge level of your task. When challenge significantly exceeds skill, you experience anxiety. When skill significantly exceeds challenge, you experience boredom. But when challenge and skill are perfectly matched, with challenge being slightly higher than current skill, you enter the flow state. This insight reveals something profound about why some people find challenging work energizing, while others find it draining. Those who experience energy and engagement have learned to calibrate their challenges to their flow zone. They're not taking on tasks that are overwhelmingly difficult or boringly easy. They're finding the sweet spot where growth happens. But accessing flow reliably requires more than just matching challenge to skill. It also requires what researchers call clear goals and immediate feedback. Your brain needs to know what success looks like and whether it's making progress toward that success. Without these elements, even perfectly calibrated challenges won't generate flow experiences. Focus, and goal clarity were associated with reduced activity within the orbit of frontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex. This neurological research reveals that flow states involve the quieting of brain regions associated with self-criticism and internal distraction. When you're truly absorbed in challenging work, the part of your brain that generates doubt, comparison, and self-judgment becomes less active. This suggests that accessing flow isn't just about external task design, it's also about internal mental management. You need to learn to quiet the mental chatter that interferes with absorption. This typically involves developing what meditation practitioners call metacognitive awareness, the ability to notice when your attention has wandered and gently redirect it back to the task. The practical implications for challenging work are significant. Instead of trying to power through difficult tasks with willpower alone, you can design your work to promote flow states. This means breaking large, complex projects into smaller components with clear success criteria. It means creating immediate feedback loops that let you know whether you're making progress. And it means calibrating the difficulty to match your current capacity while still promoting growth. Research on the goal gradient hypothesis shows that people are more motivated when they can see steady progress in front of them, even if the steps are small. This principle can be applied to flow state design by creating what I call micro milestones. Small indicators of progress that occur frequently enough to maintain engagement. These micro milestones serve dual purposes. They provide the feedback necessary for flow states, and they also help maintain motivation during long-term challenges. Instead of working for weeks or months without clear indicators of progress, you create daily or hourly signals that you're moving in the right direction. But flow state optimization also requires what researchers call challenge sequencing, the strategic ordering of tasks to maximize your capacity for sustained high performance. Not all challenges are equal, and the order in which you engage with them significantly impacts your ability to access flow states. Generally, complex cognitive work requires your highest capacity mental states, which typically occur earlier in the day. Creative work often flows better when you're slightly tired, but relaxed. Routine, but challenging work can be scheduled for mid-energy periods. Understanding these patterns allows you to sequence your challenges for optimal performance. Flow states also require what psychologists call environmental optimization, arranging your physical and social environment to support sustained attention. This means eliminating distractions, creating visual and auditory conditions that promote focus, and ensuring that your workspace communicates the importance of the work you're doing. Additionally, task-related failure was associated with increased activity within the cuneus, a structure included within the default mode network. This research insight reveals that setbacks can knock you out of flow states by reactivating the brain regions associated with self-focused thinking. Learning to quickly recover from mistakes without losing engagement is a crucial flow state skill. This recovery ability comes through what I call failure reframing, the immediate cognitive practice of treating setbacks as information rather than judgment. Instead of "I messed up," you train yourself to think, "That didn't work. Let me try a different approach." This reframe allows you to maintain the non-self-conscious engagement that characterizes flow states. But perhaps the most important insight about flow states is that they're not just pleasant experiences, they're also incredibly powerful learning states. When you're in flow, your brain is optimally configured for skill acquisition and creative problem solving. This means that challenging work done in flow states creates greater long-term capacity than the same work done through willpower alone. Understanding how to reliably access flow states transforms challenging work from something you have to force yourself through to something you actively seek out for the quality of experience it provides. When difficult tasks become vehicles for optimal experience rather than ordeals to be endured, your entire relationship with challenge fundamentally changes. Chapter 20: The Compound Effect of Challenge. One of the most remarkable aspects of consistently engaging with challenging work is how the benefits compound across every area of your life. The mental muscles you build through strategic difficulty don't just apply to the specific tasks you're working on. They transfer to completely unrelated areas, creating a cascade of positive changes that extend far beyond your original goals. Mental toughness offers many advantages. While difficult to fully define, it provides insights into why we respond the way we do to life events and how we perform at our limits. When you systematically build your capacity for handling one type of challenge, you're actually building your capacity for handling all types of challenges. This transferability occurs because challenge, regardless of its specific form, requires similar underlying mental processes. Whether you're tackling a difficult workout, learning a complex skill, having a challenging conversation, or working through a creative problem, you're using the same neural pathways for focused attention, emotional regulation, persistence through discomfort, and strategic problem solving. The same neural circuitry for motivation, willpower, and tenacity is activated similarly in demanding physical tasks, like a particularly difficult workout, as well as cognitive tasks involving mental effort, such as studying or resisting the urge to scroll social media. This cross-domain activation means that building mental toughness in one area automatically strengthens your capacity in other areas. Think about someone who has developed discipline through physical training. They've learned to push through discomfort, maintain focus when their body wants to quit, and persist despite immediate discomfort for long-term benefits. These same skills directly transfer to professional challenges, relationship difficulties, creative projects, and financial discipline. Or consider someone who has built creative resilience through artistic practice. They've learned to work with uncertainty, persist through periods when progress isn't visible, handle criticism and rejection, and keep generating new ideas when previous ideas fail. These capabilities immediately enhance their performance in business innovation, problem solving, and adaptability in any field. This compound effect explains why many peak performers in one domain often excel in seemingly unrelated domains. They're not necessarily gifted across multiple areas. They've learned to transfer the mental skills developed in their primary area to new challenges. They've built what we might call meta-competence, competence at developing competence. Every time you repeat a disciplined action, your brain reinforces the neural pathways that make that behavior easier. Think of it as creating a mental shortcut. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. But the pathway being strengthened isn't just for that specific behavior. It's for the general capacity to choose difficult actions over easy ones. This general capacity is perhaps the most valuable skill you can develop because it enables all other skills. When you can reliably choose challenging actions regardless of how you feel, you can learn anything, build anything, create anything, overcome anything. You become, in essence, unlimited in your growth potential. The compound effect also applies to your identity and self-confidence. Every time you successfully handle a challenge, you're not just accomplishing that specific task, you're also building evidence that you're someone who can handle challenges in general. This evidence accumulates over time, creating what psychologists call self-efficacy, the deep belief that you're capable of learning and growing in response to whatever life presents. Self-efficacy is one of the most powerful psychological assets you can possess, because it determines how you interpret setbacks, how quickly you recover from failures, and how willing you are to attempt new challenges. People with high self-efficacy see obstacles as problems to be solved, rather than evidence of their limitations. They recover quickly from setbacks because they interpret them as temporary rather than permanent, and they actively seek out new challenges because they trust their ability to develop whatever capabilities the challenge requires. But the compound effect extends beyond individual psychology. It also influences your social and professional environments. When you become known as someone who tackles difficult challenges effectively, people begin to bring you more interesting opportunities. You start to be included in conversations about important problems. You're invited to participate in meaningful projects. This social compound effect can dramatically accelerate your growth because you gain access to challenges that would never be available to someone known for avoiding difficulty. You get to work with other people who embrace challenge, learn from their approaches, and contribute to collective efforts that are more ambitious than anything you could accomplish alone. Even seemingly small improvements in your challenge handling capacity can generate massive changes over time. If you become just slightly better at having difficult conversations, your relationships improve. If you become slightly more willing to tackle complex problems, your professional opportunities expand. If you become slightly more persistent with creative projects, your creative output increases dramatically. The mathematics of compound improvement are striking. If you improve by just 1% each day, you'll be nearly 37 times better after 1 year. But when it comes to challenge handling, the compounding effect is even more dramatic, because each improvement opens up new opportunities for further improvement. This is why consistency in challenging work is so much more powerful than sporadic, intense efforts. The person who does something difficult for 10 minutes every day will ultimately develop far greater capacity than the person who does something difficult for 5 hours once per month. The daily practice creates compound effects that irregular efforts cannot generate. Understanding the compound effect of challenge changes how you think about every difficult task you encounter. Instead of seeing each challenge as an isolated event that you need to get through, You can see it as an investment in your overall capacity for handling difficulty. Every challenging task becomes an opportunity to build capabilities that will serve you for the rest of your life.